How often have you been worried to tell someone something and you spent days, if not weeks, mulling it over and festering and getting filled with anxiety and putting all this weight on it that literally it impacted your entire couple of weeks, and the second you told them, it was like poof. You all of a sudden were 20 pounds lighter. Welcome back to one's journey of unwinding the mind and, of course, your daily microdose. Now tune in to the latest episode of One's Journey. I want to talk about no private thoughts. Yeah, no private thoughts? Sounds interesting, huh? No private thoughts is a common part of people in the course. I know the Living Miracles Monastery, that is one of their rules. But essentially, not many of you know, a long time ago, I was a part of the 12-step program early on in life. I was 17 when I entered it due to some health issues I had and essentially some habits I had. But in the 12-step program, they always tell you secrets will make you sick. To me, that sounds a lot like no private thoughts. So essentially, the concept of having private thoughts to me is that if you have private thoughts, you are hiding from them yourself. Because your subconscious knows that we are all one. So if I share with Patrick that some sort of secret I have that I've been holding within, it is because I'm not willing to get honest with myself, and there's so much shame and guilt and weight on it. We talk about this in journaling. What you do not bring to the light operates in the darkness, right? It's not about bringing the light to the darkness. It's about bringing the darkness to the light so the light can dispel it. But if you are holding on to things and you are not willing to share them with someone else, it is because they carry too much shame and guilt for you yourself to even face. How often have you been worried to tell someone something and you spent days, if not weeks, mulling it over and festering and getting filled with anxiety and putting all this weight on it that literally it impacted your entire couple of weeks, and the second you told them, it was like poof. You all of a sudden were 20 pounds lighter. Now, if you would have just told them immediately, instead of having to go through this time of convincing yourself, the weight would have never been there. Those 2 weeks would have never been impacted in the manner in which they were. Now imagine holding on to your private thoughts for years, for decades. Imagine the weight that has built up. And let's be honest, before I really understood this concept of bringing what's in the darkness to the light so the light can dispel it, and realizing even the simplest of private thoughts I had, like being vindictive during my divorce. And this actually recently came up. I was on a podcast and it was called How to Split a Toaster, and it's essentially about divorce. And I shared that I had the opportunity that I didn't need to hire attorneys because I was lucky and I had friend attorneys. And I got my husband to sign the paperwork before he realized I had a pension. And immediately I was like, oh my God, I just said that. Holy shit, I just said that. And then I started to think, like, what are people going to think of me? And like all this stuff. And what I realized was something I was holding on to. It was something I was not willing to tell another because I had shame and guilt around that. And that was my ego thought loop going around. What will people think? What will they judge? And then I took a step back into the bird's eye view of the amount of weight that was released when I actually looked at the fact that, what does it matter? That's who I was. I don't try to represent that I was a certain kind of way during that time. I represent that I was a mess. I was very much in the ego. I was very much in fear, in survival, and doing things I am not pleased with. And me sharing it today doesn't change who I am today and never changes what I did then. But that release alone, when I took the step back and realized, like, wow, Ashley, you were holding that as a private thought. I never realized I had held it as a private thought until it word vomited out of me and all this shame and guilt came with it. But if I wouldn't have taken that moment to step back and look at what was really going on, I may have continued down that spiral of the rabbit hole. So in the process of no private thoughts, when we are allowing those private thoughts to come forward and share through journaling with ourselves even, or share them with someone we care about, or share them with the person it impacts, whatever, it's just about sharing them, actually facing them. We have to be careful because the shame and guilt comes out with it, right? I'm a visual person, it comes out with it. So if we grab onto the shame and guilt as it's exiting, then we can hold on to that shame and guilt. Even though we released that, we can still hold on to it. So the key here is no private thoughts. When we allow those thoughts to come out, what we're really doing is we're handing them over to the Holy Spirit. So that means you got to hand it over. You can't hold on to any piece of it, meaning the shame, the guilt, the regret, anything. You are sharing because you are ready for the Holy Spirit to take it over. And that's another reason why there's no private thoughts, because what you are not willing to share with yourself or someone else, you are not willing to hand over to the Holy Spirit to take care of. So it's another thing keeping you stuck in the ego belief system, keeping you from the Holy Spirit. Because the Holy Spirit, or your highest self, whatever you want to say, is not going to come in and grab all the things it needs to and fix it. You have to ask. You have to provide the permission to. And the only way is to stop keeping things from it. Because the Holy Spirit is your highest self. So if you are not willing to share it and face it yourself, you're not willing to allow your highest self to face it either. Again, it's about being true to yourself, ultimately. It's about being true and owning your journey and realizing truly you're dreaming this and none of this ever happened, but just releasing the shame and guilt that comes with those private thoughts. Now, am I saying go tell someone that you think they're a jackass? No. I mean, maybe some people would say that when they talk about no private thoughts, and maybe that's the case. But to me, again, there's a fine line. There's a fine line of swinging the pendulum and still being located within the ego belief system. Because they're like, oh, I'm not having any private thoughts. I'm going to tell that lady she's fat. Oh, I'm going to tell that person they're ugly. Whatever it may be. To me, you've just swung the pendulum to the other side, and now you're using no private thoughts as an excuse to be an ass. So if you're coming from the Holy Spirit, there is this level of discernment, I guess you could say, or a level of just humanity. Because again, the reality is we live in this illusion, so we still need to operate within this illusion. You begin to understand what's going on inside. You begin, as you're releasing these private thoughts, it's also giving you an opportunity to know you. Right? In my coaching, that's essentially what it is people are allowing themselves to face things, to share things with me that they've never shared with anyone, meaning they've never looked at it themselves. So it's like the mouse under the bed again. We think it's a monster until we actually verbalize it, which then we hand it over to the Holy Spirit, whether it's intentional or not, and then it's released. And that's when you realize it was a mouse, because the Holy Spirit took care of it. Your highest self took care of it. It doesn't need to keep weight on you anymore. And that's why, telepathy works. Or not works, but... So there is, speculation things that thousands of years ago, the time of Atlantis, or even before that, that the way of communication was telepathy. Right? So that you just read everyone's thoughts. I believe telepathy is at a higher level consciousness, and though the goal here isn't to get to higher levels of consciousness, we know that in fact that can be a walking stick to help you realize you're the dreamer of the dream, to obtain higher levels of consciousness or come from that state. So if you are at that higher level and you can read other people's minds, in my mind, the ability to do that means that you are open with your thoughts as well, because how can you tap into someone else's thoughts, which essentially is tapping into the mind, if you're ignoring part of it? That's not possible. You can't ignore a part and say you know the whole. So in order to get to that state, you first need to own all the crap you're ignoring within yourself before you can hear the entire mind. And that's also the process of hearing the Holy Spirit. because you're untying yourself from the ego, which is releasing thoughts that the ego thinks it's being able to use to keep a hold on you. And then you can hear truth, which is your highest self. I hope this video was helpful for you in realizing that those things that you haven't been wanting to face and you've shoved way down there are actually ruling you a lot. They have a lot of control over you, as much as you want to say you've gotten over it. But if you struggle to say something out loud, you know it has a hold on you. So I really hope that you take the opportunity to get honest, essentially, to really get to know yourself at a deeper level. Again, whether that is through journaling, whether that is through voice journaling, handwritten journaling, talking to the person it impacts, or hiring a coach or mentor so that you can once and for all face your reality and let it be taken care of by your highest self or the Holy Spirit, so you don't have to walk around with all of this weight. I mean, it literally feels like you are pounds lighter. Because again, our body is just a projection of the mind. So if you're carrying around all this mental weight, then in fact, it's going to show in your body. Share, share, share. As always, until next time, remember you are worth it. So much love and thank you. Bye.